The dire situation. The Xyronian High Council sat in their grand chamber, their usually glowing walls dimmed to reflect the gravity of the crisis. Leaders from all corners of their planet, Xyros, filled the room. Once a proud and thriving civilization, the Xyronians were now facing a nightmare they could not escape. The Shadow Legion had come. The Shadow Legion was not just an enemy, it was destruction given form. No one had ever survived their attacks. They arrived without warning, wiping out entire planets and leaving behind nothing but silence. For months, the Xyronians had watched as the Shadow Legion tore through their outer colonies, growing closer to Xyros. Now, the once bustling capital city of Klein was silent, with only the hum of energy shields protecting them. Supreme Chancellor Lyra Velis stood at the center of the council, her sharp blue eyes scanning the faces of her people. Fear and despair were etched onto every face. She raised her voice to address the council. "We have tried everything," she began, her voice steady but grim. "Our fleets are gone. Our defenses are failing. Every plan we've made has ended in disaster. The Shadow Legion is unstoppable." Murmurs filled the chamber, some voices rising in anger, others in panic. One elder stood up, his robes flowing around him. "Then what is left to do, Chancellor? Shall we wait here to die?" Lyra's jaw tightened. She had no answer. The Shadow Legion had shattered their fleets with ease. Their allies in the galaxy had turned away, unwilling to face the same fate. They were alone. As silence fell over the chamber, a young counselor, Calderon, stood. He was new to the council, his voice often ignored by the older members. But today, he spoke with urgency. "There is one option we haven't considered," Kale said, his voice trembling but firm. "We could ask for help." "From who?" An elder barked. "The Zaldorians. They refused us. The Torvins? They fear the Shadow Legion more than we do." Kale shook his head. "Not them. Humans." The room went completely still. For a moment, it seemed as though the council had not heard him. Then the murmurs began again, louder this time, filled with disbelief and scorn. "Humans," another elder sneered. "Those warmongers. They are dangerous, unpredictable. They care for no one but themselves." Kale raised his voice over the protests. "Yes, they are dangerous. But isn't that exactly what we need? They are warriors unlike any other in the galaxy. Even the Shadow Legion fears them. There is no record of any force defeating humanity in open battle." Lyra held up a hand, silencing the room, her gaze fixed on Kale. "Do you understand what you're suggesting? Humans are not like us. They are a death-world species, born to survive against impossible odds. If we invite them here, we may survive the Shadow Legion. But what will they demand in return?" Kale stepped forward. "Chancellor, if we do nothing, there will be no Xyronians left to worry about. I would rather face the uncertainty of humanity's help than the certainty of the Shadow Legion's destruction." The room fell silent again, the weight of his words pressing down on every soul. Lyra looked around at her people, seeing the fear in their eyes. She knew they were out of options. "Very well," she said finally. "We will send a delegation to Earth. But understand this, if we do this, we are placing the future of our species in human hands. There is no turning back." The decision sent ripples through the chamber. Some counselors muttered prayers to their gods. Others sat in stunned silence. The fear of humans was almost as great as their fear of the Shadow Legion. Outside the chamber, the city of Klein was eerily quiet. Streets that once bustled with life were now empty, as families huddled in their homes, waiting for news. Above them, the shimmering energy shield glowed faintly, their last line of defense against the approaching Shadow Legion fleet. In the central tower, Lyra stood by the window, staring out at the night sky. Somewhere out there, the Shadow Legion was coming. Their massive ships, black as the void, moved like predators, silent and unstoppable. She could almost feel their presence, like a shadow creeping over her soul. Behind her, Kale entered the room, his face pale but determined. The delegation is ready, Chancellor. They will leave for Earth immediately. Lyra nodded, her voice heavy with the weight of their choice. Do you think they will help us? Kale hesitated. Humans are unpredictable, but they value strength. If they see that we are willing to fight for our survival, they may respect us enough to help. Lyra turned to face him, her eyes hard. Then let us hope they see that before it's too late. As the Tyronian delegation prepared to leave, the Shadow Legion continued its relentless march toward Tyros. Time was running out. For the Tyronians, their fate now rested on the most dangerous species in the galaxy, humanity. First contact. The Xyronian delegation's ship, a sleek and silvery vessel named Elisar, emerged from hyperspace just outside Earth's orbit. The sight before them was awe-inspiring and intimidating. Earth was a jewel surrounded by an intricate web of satellites, defense platforms, and enormous orbital stations. Humanity's presence in space was unlike anything the Tyronians had seen before. Calderin, chosen to lead the delegation, stood in the observation deck, his heart pounding. Beside him was Commander Eriv, a seasoned Xyronian military officer who had agreed to accompany the mission, though his distrust of humans was no secret. This, Eriv muttered, his pale skin darkening in alarm, is not the work of a species afraid to fight. Kale nodded, unable to look away from the view. Even from this distance, he could feel the silent warning emanating from Earth's defenses. Come closer at your own risk. Their ship's communication console beeped, and an artificial voice filled the air. Unidentified vessel, you are approaching restricted Earth space. State your identity and purpose, or you will be destroyed. The voice was calm, emotionless, yet its message carried the weight of 1,000 guns. Kale glanced at Eriv, who shifted uncomfortably, but gave a curt nod. Kale activated the console, steadying his voice. This is Calderin of the Tyronian High Council. We come in peace to request an audience with humanity's leaders. Our purpose is urgent and concerns the survival of our species. There was a long silence. Cal's hands clenched into fists, his nerves fraying as the moments dragged on. Finally, a new voice responded. This one was human, a woman's voice, sharp and commanding. Cyronian vessel, you are instructed to power down your engines and weapons. Prepare to be boarded for inspection. Any resistance will result in immediate termination. Kale swallowed hard. He had expected suspicion, but this was beyond anything he'd imagined. Still, they had no choice. He ordered the crew to comply, and soon, the sound of docking clamps echoed through the ship. The humans boarded with military precision. Soldiers in dark, angular armor swept through the corridors of the Elisar, their weapons at the ready. Kel couldn't help but notice the way they moved. Efficient, controlled, and utterly fearless. These were not ordinary beings. They were predators. One soldier, her helmet removed to reveal piercing gray eyes, stepped forward. Her gaze locked onto Kale, and he felt as though she was dissecting him with her mind. I am Captain Rhea Carter, she said, her voice cool and measured. You requested an audience with humanity. Why? Kale forced himself to stand tall, meeting her gaze. Our world is under attack by the Shadow Legion. They are unstoppable, and our defenses are failing. We came to ask for humanity's help. Captain Carter's expression didn't change. The Shadow Legion, she repeated, as though testing the words. We've heard whispers about them, and now they're coming for you. Yes, Kale said, his voice trembling. And if they destroy us, they will turn their attention to Earth. We have no allies left. Humanity is our last hope. Carter's lips twitched, not quite a smile, but something close. Last hope, huh? You expect us to clean up your mess. Eriv bristled at her tone, stepping forward. This is not just about us. The Shadow Legion is a threat to the entire galaxy. If they reach Earth. Carter cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand. If they reach Earth, they'll find out why no one dares invade a death world. But you're asking us to risk lives and resources for a species we've never trusted. What do we get in return? Kale felt the weight of her words pressing down on him. He had no grand promises to offer, no bargaining chips. All he had was the truth. We have nothing to offer, he admitted. No wealth, no technology. But we have knowledge, detailed reports on the Shadow Legion's strategies, their weaknesses. It's not much, but it could give you an edge. Carter studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she turned to one of her soldiers. Take them to the station. Let the council decide. As the humans escorted them from the ship, Kale couldn't shake the feeling that they had stepped into the jaws of a predator. The humans were not just dangerous. They were calculating, always thinking several steps ahead. He could only hope that they would see the Shadow Legion as a threat worth fighting. The price of aid. The Xyronian delegation was ushered into a vast chamber deep within Earth's orbital station. The room was stark and utilitarian, with walls of polished steel and a massive holographic display at its center. Around a circular table sat humanity's governing council, military leaders, scientists, and politicians, each radiating a quiet intensity. At the head of the table sat Admiral Elias Ward, a man whose grizzled face told the story of decades spent in battle. Kale and his team stood at the far end of the room, feeling the weight of every gaze. The silence was unbearable, broken only when Admiral Ward leaned forward, his voice calm but razor-sharp. "Let me make one thing clear," Ward began. "Humanity doesn't fight wars for charity. We've bled too much, lost too many, to take risks without reason. So tell me, Xyronian, why should we care about your war?" Kale stepped forward, his palms sweating but his resolve unshaken. "Admiral Ward, this isn't just our war. The Shadow Legion is a plague. They conquer, consume, and move on. If they destroy us, they will come for you next. You've heard the stories. No one survives them." Ward's expression didn't change. "And yet here you are, standing before us. If no one survives, how do you know they'll come for Earth?" Kale hesitated, glancing at Commander Eriv. It was a question they had hoped to avoid, but there was no room for half-truths now, because the Shadow Legion leaves no threats behind. They devour everything in their path. Your planet, your people, it's only a matter of time before they see Earth as a challenge they cannot ignore. The council exchanged glances, their faces betraying nothing. Admiral Ward leaned back in his chair, tapping his fingers on the table. "You're asking us to risk billions of lives on your assumption. You'll need to do better than that." Before Kale could respond, Commander Eriv stepped forward, his voice steady and sharp. "With respect, Admiral, this isn't just about your planet. Humanity has a reputation for strength, for resilience, for standing against impossible odds. The galaxy watches you, and if you turn your back on us, what will that say about your so-called strength?" Ward's eyes narrowed, his gaze locking onto Eriv. "Careful, alien. You're walking a fine line between persuasion and arrogance." Kale interjected quickly, sensing the tension. "Admiral, we understand the risks you face. That's why we've brought everything we know about the Shadow Legion. Their fleet compositions, their attack patterns, their weaknesses. It's not much, but it could give you the upper hand." Ward raised an eyebrow. "Weaknesses? From a species that's losing to them?" Cal's voice faltered, but he pushed on. "Yes, we failed, but that's why we came to you. Humanity is different. You see things others don't. You adapt. You fight with a fire that no one else has." The room fell silent again, the tension thick in the air. Finally, Ward gestured to a woman seated beside him. Dr. Elara Greaves, a renowned strategist. She adjusted her glasses, her voice calm but inquisitive. "If we help you, what's in it for us? What can the Xyronians offer that justifies the risk?" Kale hesitated, searching for the right words. "We have resources, rare minerals, advanced energy technology. After the war, We will share everything we have. But more than that, we offer a partnership. Together, Exaronians and humans could stand against any threat in the galaxy. The council murmured among themselves, weighing the proposal. Ward, however, remained silent, his piercing gaze fixed on Kale. Finally, he spoke, his voice low but resolute. "There's one condition," he said. "If humanity enters this war, we lead it. Your fleets, your armies, your resources, they all fall under human command. No exceptions." Cal's breath caught. He glanced at Ariv, whose expression darkened. The idea of surrendering control to another species was unthinkable for the proud Xyronians. Yet, what choice did they have? We would need assurances," Kale stammered. "That our people's safety remains a priority." Ward's gaze hardened. "If you want to survive, you'll follow our lead. Humanity doesn't do half measures. Agree to our terms, or this meeting ends now." The ultimatum hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. Cal's mind raced. He knew the council back on Xyros would never agree, but he also knew that without humanity's help, there would be no council left to argue. "We accept," Kale said finally, his voice trembling but resolute. "For the survival of our species, we place our trust in humanity." Ward's expression didn't change, but there was a glimmer of satisfaction in his eyes. He rose from his seat, towering over the Xyronians. "Then prepare yourselves. If the Shadow Legion thinks they've seen war, they haven't met us yet." As the delegation was escorted out of the chamber, Kale felt a mix of relief and dread. They had secured humanity's aid, but at what cost? For better or worse, the future of Kairos was now in human hands. Humanity's decision. Deep within the orbital station's war room, humanity's most brilliant minds gathered. Holographic projections of the Shadow Legion's movements filled the space, their fleet patterns sprawling like a web of destruction across the galaxy. At the center of it all stood Admiral Ward, his sharp eyes scanning the data. The Exaronians had provided detailed information, but it was incomplete, fragmented, a puzzle missing its most vital pieces. The air was thick with tension. Every voice in the room spoke at once, each arguing for or against intervention. One figure, General Marcus Renfield, stood to make his stance clear. "This is madness," Renfield declared, slamming his fist on the table. "We're considering throwing humanity into a war that isn't ours. Our fleets are already stretched thin defending the colonies. We can't risk billions of lives for aliens who've never lifted a finger to help us." Dr. Ilara Greaves adjusted her glasses, her tone measured but firm. "General, if the Shadow Legion consumes Kairos, they won't stop there. They'll expand, grow stronger, and eventually, they'll come for us. Ignoring this threat is a short-term solution to a long-term disaster." Renfield scoffed. "And you're willing to gamble on the word of aliens we barely know. They claim the Shadow Legion is unstoppable, but what if they're exaggerating to manipulate us? What if this is a trap?" The room fell silent as Admiral Ward raised a hand. "Enough," he said, his voice commanding instant attention. "This isn't about trust. This is about strategy. If the Exaronians are telling the truth, and I believe they are, then we're looking at a force that could rival anything we've faced before. Ignoring it isn't an option." Ward's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of responsibility. He gestured toward the holographic map, zooming in on the Xyronian homeworld. "They're desperate," Ward continued. "Desperate enough to hand over control of their fleets, their armies, and their resources. That gives us an advantage. We don't just help them. We take command of this war. And if the Shadow Legion is as dangerous as they claim, humanity's strength will be what turns the tide." General Renfield frowned but said nothing. The others exchanged uneasy glances. Ward's plan was bold, audacious even, but it was undeniably human, calculated, and relentless. A different perspective. Meanwhile, in the guest quarters assigned to the Xyronians, Calderon paced nervously. Commander Erev sat silently, his arms crossed, watching Kale with a mix of frustration and pity. "You shouldn't have agreed so quickly," Erev muttered, "handing our fleets over to them. What happens when the war is over? Do you think humanity will just walk away?" Kale stopped and turned to face him. "What choice did we have, Erev? Without them, there is no war to end. There's only extinction." Erev's gaze hardened. "Then we should have fought on our own terms. Humanity is powerful, yes, but they're unpredictable. They don't act out of charity. They act out of self-interest." Kale sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe you're right. But if we survive this, we'll find a way to rebuild. We'll find a way to keep our independence." Erev didn't respond, but his expression made it clear he didn't share Kale's optimism. The final vote. Back in the war room, the council reached the moment of decision. Admiral Ward stood at the head of the table, his piercing gaze sweeping over the assembled leaders. "All in favor of committing our forces to aid the Tyronians, raise your hand." One by one, hands went up. Some were raised reluctantly, others with conviction. General Renfield hesitated, his jaw clenched, but eventually raised his hand as well. The vote was unanimous. Ward nodded, his voice steady. "Then it's settled. Humanity will answer this threat with the full force of our fleets. But let me make one thing clear. This isn't just a rescue mission. This is a declaration. The galaxy will know that humanity does not stand idly by when its survival is at stake." The room erupted into action as orders were relayed. Massive holographic displays lit up with the mobilization of Earth's fleet, a sight that struck awe even into the hardened generals. Battlecruisers, frigates, and carriers began their preparations, their crews readying for war. A glimpse of humanity's might. On the observation deck, Kale and Erev stood alongside a human liaison officer, watching as Earth's fleet began to assemble. Hundreds of ships moved with precision, their sleek designs bristling with weaponry. Erev's usual skepticism faltered as he muttered, "I've never seen anything like this." Kale didn't respond, his eyes fixed on the lead ship, a massive battlecruiser named the Resolute, its hull gleaming under the light of Earth's sun. For the first time in weeks, he felt a glimmer of hope. The human liaison officer, a young woman with a wry smile, glanced at them. "Impressive, isn't it? And this is just the vanguard. When humanity decides to fight, we don't hold back." Kale nodded slowly, a mix of awe and fear swelling in his chest. Humanity was everything he had heard, and more. The unstoppable fleet. The jump to Tyronian space was seamless, but the arrival was anything but calm. As humanity's fleet exited hyperspace, the scene before them was chaotic. The Shadow Legion's warships hovered ominously over Xyros, their black, jagged hulls absorbing the light from the planet's sun. Below, the shimmering energy shield protecting the capital flickered, on the verge of collapse. Admiral Ward stood on the command deck of the Resolute, his face grim as he surveyed the battlefield. "Status report," he barked. A junior officer responded swiftly. "The Shadow Legion's fleet consists of 217 ships, sir. Their primary forces are concentrated near the planetary shield generator. Tyronian defenses are minimal. Only 6 functioning ships remain, and they're barely holding." Ward's lips tightened. "Send out the order. Formation Gamma. Let's show the Shadow Legion what they've just invited to the dance." Humanity's strategy. Unlike the Tyronians, who had relied on brute force and advanced shielding, humanity's fleet operated like a single organism. The battlecruisers formed a wall of firepower, their massive cannons charging as frigates and destroyers flanked the enemy lines. At the center of it all, the Resolute orchestrated every move like a conductor leading a symphony. Kale and Erev, observing from the Tyronian flagship Elisar, watched in stunned silence as the human fleet moved into position. Kale had expected chaos, desperation, and overwhelming firepower, but what he saw instead was precision, discipline, and something else he couldn't quite name. "They're not just fighting," Eriv muttered, his voice low with awe. "They're hunting." The first salvo came from humanity's long-range artillery ships, their railguns unleashing kinetic slugs that tore through the Shadow Legion's vanguard. Explosions lit up the darkness of space, and for the first time, the invincible Shadow Legion seemed to hesitate. On the bridge of Elisar, Kale turned to his human liaison, Lieutenant Sarah Vega. "How are they doing this? The Shadow Legion has never faltered like this before." Vega smirked, her arms crossed confidently. "They've never faced humanity before. We don't just fight wars. We end them." The turning point. As the battle raged on, the Shadow Legion began to adapt, shifting their tactics. Their ships moved in coordinated waves, targeting humanity's flanking frigates with devastating precision. On the deck of the Resolute, Admiral Ward watched the change with narrowed eyes. "They're learning," he muttered, "just like we thought they would." Dr. Greaves, stationed at a tactical console, nodded. "That's their strength. They adapt quickly. But so do we." Ward's voice rang out across the command deck. "Deploy the Phantom Squadron." Phantom Squadron was humanity's ace in the hole. A fleet of stealth bombers equipped with experimental cloaking technology, they slipped past the Shadow Legion sensors like ghosts. Moments later, the enemy's rear lines erupted in flames as the bombers unleashed devastating payloads. On the Elisar, Kale and Eriv watched in stunned silence as the Shadow Legion ships began to crumble from within. "They're attacking from behind their lines," Eriv whispered. "How did they even get there?" "Human ingenuity," Vega said simply. "We always keep something in our back pocket." The cost of victory. Despite humanity's overwhelming firepower and strategy, the battle was far from one-sided. The Shadow Legion's counterattacks were brutal, and several human ships were lost in the chaos. On the bridge of the Resolute, Ward issued orders with a steady hand, but the weight of each loss was etched into his face. "Prioritize the shield generator," he commanded. "If that goes down, Tyros falls." The Shadow Legion seemed to realize this as well. Their flagship, a monstrous vessel bristling with weapons, began to descend toward the planet. Its cannons charged with a sickly red glow, aimed directly at the shield generator. "We're running out of time," Dr. Greaves warned. "If that flagship fires, the shield won't hold." Ward's jaw tightened. "Divert all power to forward weapons. Target that flagship." A desperate gambit. The final moments of the battle came down to a single gamble. The Resolute charged head-on toward the Shadow Legion's flagship, its weapons blazing. Smaller human ships shielded it, taking heavy fire as they cleared a path. On board the Elisar, Kale and Eriv watched in horror and awe as the Resolute closed the distance. "They're going straight for it," Kale said, his voice trembling. "They're insane," Eriv muttered. "No one takes on a ship like that head-on." But humanity didn't play by the rules of the galaxy. As the Resolute reached point-blank range, it unleashed its most powerful weapon. The Aegis Cannon, a massive energy weapon capable of piercing even the strongest shields. The Shadow Legion flagship erupted in a brilliant explosion, its remains scattering into the void. With their flagship destroyed, the remaining Shadow Legion ships faltered. The human fleet pressed the advantage, forcing the enemy into a full retreat. The aftermath. The battle was over, but its cost was clear. Dozens of human ships floated lifeless in the void, their crews lost. The Xyronian shield flickered weakly, barely holding on. On board the Resolute, Admiral Ward stood silent, his gaze fixed on the wreckage. Kale, watching from the Elisar, felt a strange mix of emotions. Relief that his people had been saved, awe at humanity's strength, and fear of what they had unleashed. Vega turned to him, her expression uncharacteristically solemn. "This is what it takes to survive," she said. "This is humanity's strength, and its burden. Humanity's strategy." The Shadow Legion had retreated, but the war was far from over. On board the Resolute, the atmosphere was tense. The victory at Tyros had been hard-fought, but humanity's leaders knew it was only the first step. The Shadow Legion wasn't defeated. They were regrouping, and when they returned, they would come back stronger. Admiral Ward stood in the war room, surrounded by holographic projections of the battlefield. The Shadow Legion's patterns were displayed in intricate detail, each ship a glowing red marker. At his side were Dr. Elara Greaves, the brilliant strategist, and Captain Rhea Carter, fresh from leading the Phantom Squadron's decisive strike. "This isn't over," Ward said, his voice low but firm. "The Shadow Legion doesn't run unless they have a plan. They're testing us, gathering data. Next time, they won't underestimate us." Dr. Greaves nodded, her expression grim. "We need to strike before they recover. If we wait for them to come to us, we'll be fighting on their terms." Captain Carter crossed her arms, her sharp gaze scanning the projections. "We've got the momentum. If we hit them now, we might catch them off guard. But where do we strike? Their fleet is scattered, and their homeworld is still a mystery." Ward turned to Graves, who tapped a console, bringing up a map of the galaxy. "The Tyronians' data gave us one potential lead," she said. "A relay station used by the Shadow Legion to coordinate their fleets. It's heavily guarded, but if we take it out, we can disrupt their operations and buy ourselves time." A dangerous proposal. In the Tyronian flagship Elisar, Kale and Commander Eriv were summoned to a meeting with Admiral Ward and his team. As they entered the war room, they were met with a mixture of human and Tyronian faces, all focused on the glowing map. Ward wasted no time. "We've identified a key target, a Shadow Legion relay station. It's critical to their operations, and if we destroy it, we can throw them into chaos." Kale frowned, his anxiety growing. "You want to take the fight to them. Isn't that dangerous? They'll be expecting retaliation." Ward's gaze was cold and steady. "It's dangerous, yes, but waiting for them to regroup is suicidal. We need to act while we have the advantage." Dr. Greaves stepped forward, addressing both humans and Tyronians. "This won't be a simple assault. The station is protected by a planetary defense grid, automated drones, and a fleet twice the size of what we faced at Tyros. This will require precision and coordination." Kale exchanged a glance with Eriv, who looked skeptical. "And you expect us to just follow your orders again?" Eriv asked, his tone edged with distrust. Ward's expression didn't waver. "You came to us for help. If you want to survive, you'll do it our way. That's the deal." The plan unfolds. Over the next few days, humans and Tyronians worked side by side, preparing for the operation. The plan was audacious. A small, stealth-oriented strike team would infiltrate the relay station and plant charges to disable its systems. Meanwhile, the fleet would engage the Shadow Legion forces, drawing attention away from the infiltration team. Kale found himself working closely with Captain Carter, who was assigned to lead the infiltration mission. Despite her stern demeanor, Carter had a sharp wit that occasionally surfaced, catching him off guard. "You're awfully quiet," Carter said during a strategy briefing. "Second thoughts." Kale hesitated, then shook his head. "Not second thoughts. Just doubts about whether we can pull this off." Carter smirked. "You're not the first to doubt us, but let me tell you something about humans. We don't fight fair. When we go to war, we fight to win, no matter what it takes." The infiltration begins. As the fleet jumped into the relay station system, chaos erupted. The Shadow Legion was waiting, their ships forming a defensive perimeter around the station. Humanity's fleet wasted no time, engaging with precision and ferocity. Amid the chaos, the infiltration team launched in a cloaked shuttle, slipping past the defenses unnoticed. On board, Kale found himself clutching his seat as Carter piloted the shuttle with unnerving calm. "This isn't your first time doing this, is it?" Kale asked, trying to steady his nerves. Carter chuckled. "Not even close. Stick to the plan, and we'll get through this." The shuttle landed on the station, its stealth systems masking their presence. The team moved quickly, planting charges and gathering data from the station's systems. The air was thick with tension, every shadow a potential threat. A shocking revelation. While accessing the station's databanks, the team stumbled upon something unexpected: detailed schematics of Earth's defenses, including weaknesses the Shadow Legion planned to exploit. Kale stared at the data, his stomach twisting. They've been studying you. They know more about your defenses than you realize. Carter's expression hardened. And now we know what they know. Let's make sure they never get to use it. As alarms blared, the team raced to finish their mission. The charges were set, and the team prepared for extraction. But the Shadow Legion wasn't about to let them leave without a fight. The aftermath. The charges detonated with a blinding flash, ripping through the Shadow Legion relay station. Its intricate web of communications collapsed, sending shockwaves of confusion through the enemy fleet. On board humanity's flagship, the Resolute, Admiral Ward watched as the Shadow Legion ships faltered. Their once coordinated movements became erratic, opening gaps in their defenses. "Now's our chance," Ward said, his voice steady but urgent. "Press the attack." The human fleet surged forward with ruthless precision. Battle cruisers unleashed devastating volleys, tearing through the disoriented enemy. The Shadow Legion, once thought invincible, began to retreat in disarray. The infiltration teams escaped. Inside the crumbling relay station, the infiltration team fought their way back to the shuttle. Shadow Legion drones swarmed the corridors, their metallic forms glinting ominously in the flickering lights. Calderon clutched a plasma rifle, his hands trembling as he fired at the relentless machines. Beside him, Captain Rhea Carter moved with practiced efficiency, her commands sharp and unwavering. "Keep moving," Carter shouted, taking down a drone with a precise shot. "We're not dying here." The team reached the shuttle just as the station began to collapse. As they lifted off, a massive explosion rocked the station, sending debris spiraling into space. Carter piloted the shuttle with skill, weaving through the chaos to rejoin the fleet. The Shadow Legion retreats. As the infiltration team returned to the Resolute, the Shadow Legion began a full-scale retreat. Their ships blinked out of existence one by one, retreating to the dark corners of the galaxy. Cheers erupted on the bridge of the Resolute, but Admiral Ward remained stoic. "This isn't over," he said, his voice cutting through the celebration. "They'll be back. Stronger, smarter, and angrier." Kale and Commander Eriv were brought to the bridge to witness the aftermath. Eriv, who had been skeptical of humanity from the start, stared at the display in silence. For the first time, he seemed to grasp the full extent of humanity's capabilities and their determination. "You did it," Kale said, his voice filled with awe. "You actually drove them back." Ward turned to him, his expression unreadable. "For now. But don't mistake this for victory. This was a warning, a reminder of what we're capable of. The Shadow Legion won't forget it, and neither should you." The cost of survival. The Exironians celebrated their survival, their people gathering in the streets of their capital to cheer as the human fleet orbited above. But the mood aboard the human ships was somber. Dozens of ships had been lost, and thousands of lives along with them. In the medical bay of the Resolute, Kale visited Carter, who was being treated for a minor injury sustained during the mission. She was seated on a cot, her usual sharpness replaced with quiet reflection. "You don't seem like someone who just won a battle," Kale said, sitting beside her. Carter glanced at him, a faint smirk on her lips. "That's because I know this wasn't the end. It never is. We're not celebrating. We're preparing for the next fight." Kale frowned. "Do you think we'll ever truly defeat them?" Carter's smirk faded, replaced with a thoughtful expression. "Maybe. But survival isn't about defeating every enemy. It's about making sure they know that no matter how hard they hit us, we'll always hit back harder." A new alliance. Admiral Ward and Supreme Chancellor Lyra Velis stood in the Tyronian High Council chamber, a stark contrast to the first meeting held in desperation. This time, the humans stood tall, their presence commanding. "You've proven yourselves," Lyra said, her voice filled with gratitude. "Without you, Xyros would have fallen. We owe you our survival." Ward nodded, his expression firm. "And now it's time to ensure it stays that way. Humanity doesn't fight for gratitude. We fight for results. If we're going to keep the Shadow Legion at bay, we need to work together." The two leaders clasped hands, sealing a new alliance. For the Tyronians, it was a chance at survival. For humanity, it was a step toward securing their place in a galaxy filled with threats. A warning for the future. As the human fleet prepared to depart, Kel stood on the observation deck of the LSR, watching the ships vanish into hyperspace. Beside him, Erev remained silent, his usual skepticism replaced with quiet contemplation. "They're more than we ever imagined," Erev finally said. "More dangerous, more determined, and more powerful." Kale nodded. "And yet, they chose to help us. They didn't have to." Erev's gaze darkened. "Don't mistake their kindness for weakness. Humanity fights for survival, and they'll do whatever it takes to win. We've gained allies, yes, but we've also awakened something the galaxy may never fully understand." As the Xyronians began to rebuild, a message was sent to every corner of the galaxy. Humanity had entered the war. For the Shadow Legion, it was a warning. For others, it was a glimmer of hope. But for Kale and those who had witnessed humanity's strength firsthand, it was a reminder of a simple truth. The most dangerous force in the galaxy wasn't the Shadow Legion. It was humanity.